As the North Tower burned that oddly beautiful September morning, a message raced towards us with bewildering force. In an instant, when the second plane hit, everything changed. America's relationship with the world, with every country, friend or foe, was suddenly and permanently different. Even as America's territory and its citizens, as well as citizens of 80 other countries, were violated that day, nearly 2,000 miles away in Lima, Peru, another historic event, one in counterbalance to the attacks, took place simultaneously. Leaders from 34 of the 35 countries in the Western Hemisphere were gathered to sign the Inter-American Democratic Charter, a document designed to promote and defend democratic government in the hemisphere. They stood together, shocked.
This was actually approved unanimously by acclamation while the attacks were still going on in the United States. We witnessed, literally standing as a community, these attacks on humanity, on our democratic values, on our shared commitment to respect for human rights. This document starts with simple but profound statement that the peoples of the Americas have a right to democracy, and their governments have an obligation to promote and defend it.
The signing of the Inter-American Democratic Charter is an example of diplomacy in action, a relentless effort working toward peace and security that our U.S. Department of State engages in daily. It is not just luck that every country but one in the Western Hemisphere is a democracy. Diplomacy in action works. But diplomacy in action is more, a lot more, than agreements between nations. The U.S. Department of State is America's most active and engaged representative overseas, providing support to American citizens and forging stronger relationships with other nations, whether they be friend or foe. There are 192 countries in the world, and the United States maintains diplomatic relations with 180 of them. The Department of State directs all of America's embassies and consulates across the globe, and after September 11, 2001, the focus of work in many of these countries shifted considerably.
I have geographic responsibility for Russia, Ukraine, Moldova, Belarus, and as with pretty much every country desk in the State Department, on September 12, counterterrorism was issue number 1, 2, or 3 on your agenda with that country. We had a very fascinating discussion at a session about a year ago in the Counterterrorism Working Group, where one of the people from one of the intelligence agencies said, "We're looking at ways of intensifying our cooperation." And he said, "This is kind of hard for us to do." And he basically said, for a number of years, when I was talking about the target, who I was going after, who was I focusing, it was Russia. And I'm talking to my friend over here on the other side of the table, and his target was me. His target was the United States. And now we're beginning to learn that no, the real target, it's Al-Qaeda, it's the Taliban, it's international terrorist networks, and we're beginning to shift that. And it takes a while to make those sorts of changes, but these sorts of contacts which take place in diplomatic channels within these working groups are going to help accelerate that. There was basically an FBI sting operation conducted with the Russian counterpart. After 2 years of very close work, he was arrested in December. He's now been indicted on several charges. But here was somebody who was trying to bring man-portable air defense missiles into the United States that would have been a real threat. And this kind of cooperation that we've been talking about in the last 2.5 years enabled us to get the guy.
The public rarely hears when state is successful at apprehending those who would do us harm. That's because the potential harm is a non-event and fails to capture the attention of the press.
We often measure our success not in terms of a concrete deliverable or a concrete accomplishment, but in avoidance of disaster.
That's why the Department of State is so involved in working toward helping regions around the world become more stable. Instability in any region of the world has implications for America.
It would be a legitimate question to ask why we're taking care of Zimbabweans when there are Americans in need. I certainly wouldn't advocate taking care of Zimbabweans to the exclusion of Americans in need. I would like to think that we are a country with the resources to do both. But I'm persuaded, and I hope people are increasingly persuaded that again, we're not in a vacuum here. We are interdependent on the international community. A country that is poor, that is destabilized, that has children raising children, poses risks to us, security risks to us. This is where terrorism can grow. This is where where other destabilizing influences, health risks can emerge and not be addressed if we're not there and we're not doing our part to engage.
As we saw, when a country is allowed to deteriorate to the level that Afghanistan deteriorated, then it becomes a haven for terrorist organizations like Al-Qaeda, and it encourages the rise of extremist groups like the Taliban, which essentially took over the country and set the country back many, many years.
But in a remarkably short time, the situation in Afghanistan has turned around. The strategy was to secure the country, provide humanitarian assistance, and then help it to rebuild. It's working.
Afghanistan is a classic case of diplomacy in action. We sat down with the senior government officials and talked through the problem, and we came to a common understanding that Afghan has particular human vulnerability problems. So we came to an understanding that there has to be a practical approach to dealing with the vulnerability of Afghan people. And then based upon that common understanding of the problem, we started working toward what are some solutions. And one of the solutions which came to mind was the use of an employment generation scheme. How can we start putting cash in the hands of the people?
The new Afghan constitution is working and could become the model for new constitutions elsewhere. It is truly an amazing transformation. The Department of State is working very hard all over the globe to assure that another Afghanistan does not happen. In the past, countries most often became destabilized by civil war and economic chaos. Now a new threat to regional stability is emerging, especially in Africa, where 40 million people are now infected with HIV/AIDS.
The magnitude of this disease, 40 million people infected, is such that it's impacting the well-being of the entire world. Addressing HIV/AIDS around the world is really a very important aspect of our national security activity also.
So the Department of State is working to make certain the spread of AIDS does not destabilize regions by supporting programs in all the affected countries. An AIDS fund of $15 billion was established to help.
The way this fund will work is that of the $15 billion that's being committed over 5 years, about $5 billion will go to about 100 countries where the United States has had HIV/AIDS programs of some kind for some time. About $9 billion of the $15 billion will go to 15 of those 100 countries that have a much more severe problem. And then about $1 billion will go to our most important multinational partner, the Global Fund, which is a fund that many countries are contributing to and other donors where those efforts are being pooled to fight AIDS.
The State Department does more than look after America's interests abroad. It looks after Americans as well. Despite all the challenges overseas that provide potentially insecure environments for Americans, we continue to travel the globe for business and pleasure, and the Department of State works hard to help keep them safe.
Our webpage in Consular Affairs gets more hits than the rest of the department combined. The reason for that is we have on our website information for travelers. We have a consular information sheet, as we call it, for each country. We have all of the travel warnings. We have public announcements telling people what places might be unsafe to go to at this time. Just another example of how Consular Affairs really touches people's lives. It's not abstract. It's a very real way of helping people.
In fact, the Department of State website is an awesome place to visit for anyone curious about the world. There are plenty of links on this disc. You can join email groups, watch daily press briefings, find out what is happening in any country. Conflict is an inevitable part of the human experience, but conflict will not reach the stage of violence and war if it's aggressively confronted early and thoughtfully, and if we pay attention to its underlying causes. For America to be safe and secure, we must pursue peaceful mechanisms to stabilize emerging crises. And that motivates the Department of State to put diplomacy in action every day.